Good evening. Welcome to our July 12th Police Oversight Board meeting. My name is Leonard Waits. I'm the chair. We would first have a pledge of allegiance. That's fine.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic.
Our mission statement is advancing constitutional policing and accountability for APD and the Albuquerque community. Can I get approval of tonight's agenda?
I move that we approve the agenda. I second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Thank you. Mr. Pete Donnelly is the only one signed up for public comments. Pete, can you come up? Welcome.
Welcome. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to speak this evening. I saw last night that I guess you're going to be discussing the homicide investigations, and that's why I wanted to come today. I come before you this evening as both the former Chief Public Safety Officer for the City of Albuquerque, but also as the former Chief Deputy District Attorney for Bernalillo County, having served also in the Violent Crimes Division of the DA's office. I'm extremely concerned, I'm very alarmed about what's been happening with our city, especially when it comes to the homicide rate. I really believe that we are now faced with a number of homicides to the effect that we are now faced with, let me say this. I really believe that we're at the point where we're suffering from an epidemic number of homicides in the Albuquerque area. And I believe that we need to really be very aggressive in addressing that. At the heart of this is the fact that it's my understanding, according to recent police reports, as well as recent news studies, that there are only 5 detectives assigned to the homicide unit. On top of that, there are 3 to 4 more that are being trained to take over. I can tell you right now that is one unit that probably should be at 15 or 16 homicide detectives. There's no getting around it. I think that you're going to have to increase that division as well as increase the type of training that they are being given. We have experts out there that are retirees that could probably come back and give help with the Albuquerque Police Department. There's others that are in the reserves unit that could also assist with the homicide unit, and I'd encourage you to do that. The statistics that I gave you, I think, speak for themselves. I handed out a chart, and it shows that the homicide unit is faced with an alarming rate of increase. What we're looking at this year alone is a 50% increase in homicides over last year. I think the statistics are such where they speak for themselves in the sense that you have so many homicides that are now occurring that they cannot keep up with the investigations. Last year alone, we had roughly 70 homicides in the Albuquerque area, and there are still 36 to 40 of those homicides that are being investigated. This year alone, we're pushing 40. That is an unacceptable level. And what happens, especially from a prosecutorial standpoint, is that when a homicide occurs and there is in fact an arrest made, what happens, if a person is taken into custody, there's a 10-day rule that comes into play. And there has to be an indictment within 10 days if a person is held in custody. The reason why I bring that up is that I believe that that was a contributing factor with what happened with the Martins case. This is Victoria Martins' case. I believe you had a situation where the investigation was not completed, that they had gone ahead and conducted interviews, and it turns out there was a lot of DNA evidence that was never processed. It took them a year and a half to get to it. Now we have a situation where the homicide unit is faced with the accusation that they did a very poor job. And I would submit to you that the time has come for this committee and this administration to recognize you're going to have to beef up that unit, not only with personnel, but with training. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Okay. We have no one else, no public comments. Thank you. Can I get a motion on approval of the minutes?
I second.
The motion second that we approve the minutes. Are all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? No opposed? Thank you. Reports from city staff, APD.
Good evening, Chair Waits, members of the board. My name is Mike Miller from Internal Affairs, and I just have the statistics from the Internal Affairs Unit for the cases for the month of June. The calls for service that we had for the entire department for June were going to be 44,774, and that was actually a decrease of 1,756 calls for service from the previous month.
You said fire department? Did you say
Sorry?
fire department or our department?
From our department.
Oh, sorry, I misunderstood you.
Okay. So the total amount of internal cases that we had for the Albuquerque Police Department for the month of June were 6. Of those cases, none of those were administratively closed, none were mediated. And the discipline imposed for those cases that were closed included 1 for training, 1 verbal reprimand, a suspension of 8 hours, and a suspension of 160 hours. We also have our earlier intervention system reports that we give out to the officers. We had 69 alerts that were distributed for that month as well. We have 14 cases pending for the month of June, and I believe that's all the information that I have, and I will stand for any questions that you may have.
When will we get a report on accidents like we did previously?
Yeah, we were going to get a every quarter
Quarter or
update
something.
from the time of the study, which was more than 3 months ago.
Yeah.
It's the one that TJ Wilhelm did. Are you familiar with what?
I am not, but I
Okay.
can definitely check into that, and if you need numbers
We
of
asked,
accidents, we can get that for sure.
Let me give you the information that
Yes,
we
ma'am.
asked the Real-Time Crime Center along with, I don't know if it's Commander, I don't know the right title, Sanchez, who's ahead of the officers, the operations part. Officer, I don't know his title, do you? No? Well,
No, I'm not
anyway,
sure who you're
he,
referring to.
Risk Management and TJ Wilhelm, the Real-Time Crime Center, did a study for us on accidents in which officers were involved, because we thought the numbers were really high when we saw them on this IA report. And we have not been updated since then, and the agreement was that we would be updated every 3 months, and we have not. So could you take that back to whoever needs to know it, and maybe
Yes,
next
Chair
time?
Waits, Member Fina absolutely will do that.
That would be
We'll have a
great.
report for you very
I
quickly.
appreciate that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone from city council? No. How about the mayor's office? Welcome.
Hello.
Hi. Hi, Chairman Waits, members of the board. It's good to see you again. I'm Sarita Nair, the Chief Administrative Officer for the city. I was actually coming here to make sort of a formal presentation of the chief now that he's been confirmed by the city council. So I'm just going to filibuster for a minute while I wait for him to come here. You know, we appointed Chief Geyer as the interim chief pretty much on the first day that we took office. And it's been clear to me since the very first time that I spoke to him that he's the right person for this job. Some of the things that stand out to me from our very first conversation was his willingness to talk about culture change at the department, his desire to shift the way that the department engages with the community from warrior to guardian, his sort of unique academic perspective. It's very rare that you find somebody who's 40 years on the job and still likes to think sort of about the theory behind policing, behind the academy. And so we really felt that he was the right person to lead reform as well as fighting crime in our city. That first 6 months while we awaited and went through the process, you know, we were really open and interviewed a number of candidates. We had a pretty vigorous selection process. We got applications from all over the country. We got some folks who were pretty well qualified too. But in none of those candidates did we see that same constellation of characteristics, the ability to lead change and the desire to create change within the department the experience fighting crime, and then also the ability to sort of zoom back and say, what is the rest of the country doing? We're not the only people facing these challenges. So once again, Chief Geyer emerged as our top candidate, and then last month in the City Council meeting, he was confirmed. And so I don't think I filibustered longer for him to appear, but I'm happy to answer any other questions that you might have for the administration.
There's another place on the agenda where we're going to talk under 9B. We're going to talk again about APD, so if he's here by then, maybe you can do that.
Perfect.
Okay?
Yeah, any other comments? Any questions? Okay.
Okay,
Thank you very much.
All right, the city attorney?
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen of the board. My name is Lindsay Van Meter. I am new to the city legal team, and I'm here today to give you an update. We've been working diligently on the use of force policies and updating them. Use of force, which is 252, SOP 252, passed PPRB, and we will be getting it to you for your 30-day review if it hasn't already made it to you as soon as possible. 253 is the use of force definitions. It was heard by OPA today. It will be posted on Power DMS for 7 days of comments by sworn personnel, and the public will have an opportunity to comment on it through the city's website. SOP 254 is the intermediate use of weapons policy. It is still being reviewed prior to going to OPA. The city has met and provided a draft to the monitor and the parties, and their comments are due back tomorrow, and then we hope to get it to OPA next week or the week after. The same thing is de-escalation. SOP 2-55 is in the same stage. It has been provided to the monitor and the parties, and comments are due tomorrow. 2-56 is force reporting and investigations. It's in progress, and the goal is to get it to the monitor and the parties within the next week or two. As far as the court proceedings go, we are using an alternate reporting mechanism, as you probably are aware, to the court. On August 31st, both the city and the monitor will provide a joint status report to the court, and this will be the second joint status report in lieu of the 7th monitor's report. Thereafter, we will have another monitor's report shortly thereafter. In addition, we have scheduled amici meetings next week with all of the amici who are present in this case. And I'm prepared to answer any questions if you have any.
Go ahead, Joe.
It was my understanding the last time when somebody from APD spoke about the use of force policy 252, that all of the other policies within that suite would also come before this body in the same way. I think we all felt it was a successful exchange. So it's I just want to make sure that when you say these things are going to happen, that doesn't exclude us
Of course
from
not.
the process. All right.
So, yes, I know for sure that you get the policies once it's gone to PPRB, but I believe we provide them to you. We have been providing them to you before then, and I'll confer with Jeremy Schmel, who didn't quite make it in here in time to answer your question, but I will confirm and confer with him.
I'm going to assume that we are going to see it that way, and if not, you'll let us know.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
We have one more question.
Yeah, I'd like to elaborate a little bit on that. And I think that we've started something that I think is good, and I hope it'll continue, and that is that we get on important policies, and especially all the CASA policies, that we have someone present that at an OPA-style meeting, but not in lieu of OPA. I think that, and so I think that happened last month. I know it happened last month, and I didn't happen to be here at the meeting, but it's something that we've been working on with APD in a cooperative way, and I think that I want that to continue. So I'd also like to point out that I think this is a milestone, that 252 got through PPRB, and I think in a generally accepted way, so that it is clearly a better policy than the previous policy. I think that the participants learned a lot in the process, and I think that it sets the stage for the rest of the policies that are being, the use of force suite especially, that's being reviewed at the moment. So I'll say more about that later, but I think it was a good experience, and so we'll expect to see somebody back.
Absolutely. And may I defer to Commander Campbell to answer Ms. Fine's question?
Sure.
So, Ms. Fine and members of the POB, I want to let you know that, yes, we will be doing a presentation like they did on 252 a while back. 254 had just gone for review, and we didn't want to present something that wasn't a complete product. But in speaking with Mr. Harness, we assured that we would be at the August, I don't want to get it wrong, 7th? 9th. I always get to say it
9th.
wrong. So we will be here at the August 9th meeting.
We're very excited about this. I don't know how y'all feel about it, but I'm hoping you feel as good as we do. It really was very exciting to be here and to have so many community members here giving their input and have the police department being so attentive to those, that input. I really thought it was great. So I'm hoping that we get to see that again. I'm glad to hear we will.
Yeah, the department feels the same way, and we appreciate the recommendations and the feedback that we had gotten from not only from you all, but from the community.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments or questions? No? No? Thank you. Anyone
wanna
from,
have,
oh, yeah, Chief is here. I see him.
Come on.
Yeah, please do. Welcome.
Thank you. Sorry, I had a long staff meeting, so ran a little late. But I'm glad to be here, members of the board. Thank you.
We're glad you're here.
Okay.
We said that in your absence the last time when you were confirmed and passed by the city council. But it's nice to see you in person so we can tell you in person, at least for me.
Yeah.
I'll speak for myself. I think you're doing great.
Well, thank you, Ms. Fine. I appreciate that. And again, we're here to work with the board and the members. I know we've met, we've had some meetings already. It's a busy time to coordinate all these efforts at the same time, and I think it's an exciting time for the city because we're making positive changes in so many different ways and recognizing mistakes of the past and lessons learned and moving forward rather than dragging on and hanging on to the old APD, so to speak.
I just want to say thank you for the meetings that we did have early
Yeah.
on. Definitely appreciate that. I got to get a good feel for who you were and how you felt about things, so I appreciate that, so thank you.
And we're going to have some more questions later that really have to do with detective training and some of the cases we've heard, so I don't know if you are able to stay for that.
I'll
but
stay for that.
It would be
We
great
had our
if you
discussion at
could.
our staff meeting as well, so
Okay, great.
that's fine.
Any questions for the chief? No? Thank you, sir.
Okay, well, thank you.
No one from the CPC, correct? Uh-oh.
Oh, there you are.
Chris, you snuck in on us. Welcome.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair Waits and board members. I was in that staff meeting too, so that's why I was a little bit late.
You understand?
Since the last time we were here, last time I was here, the CPCs have been meeting on a regular basis. They're still doing well. They're exceeding the CASA requirements of meeting like twice a year, so they're still meeting monthly. The Foothills CPC and the Southwest CPC have added new voting members, and at the Valley CPC, Commander Middleton from the IA Force Division, he spoke about the new use of force policy, and the comments that were taken from that meeting, I understand, were incorporated into the comments were taken in, and they're considered comments from the public. That's the best way I can put that. I'll let Director Harness say specifically what happened, but I wasn't there. So that's about it, very brief.
One thing I would like to say, I'd like to see more of the CPCs, the members and those type people at our meetings, because
Yes.
I'm sure they have a lot of good input on what we're doing and suggestions on how we can do a better job. So
Okay, sounds
please
good.
invite them
I
to our
do.
meetings.
And Kathleen Burke is here in the audience. Yep, she is, so
Okay,
we will get that word out.
all right, thank you. Any other comments?
How is the feedback from the 252 from the CPC that
There
heard
was
it?
just one presentation. It was
No,
at
but I
the
mean,
Valley.
what was the response by the CPC? Did they generally like it? Did they have a lot of suggestions? Was it well-received or
They
not?
had a lot of suggestions, and I believe that was the meeting I had to leave halfway through because I had
okay.
another commitment, but, you know, like I said, I'll let Director Harness
Oh, okay, great.
elaborate a little further when his time is there.
Thank you very much, Chris.
Thank you.
I'm sorry. I just want to kind of follow up on an email that was sent out by a member of the community that went to a variety of people. But one of the things was, and it was regarding censorship at the CBC meetings. Do you know what I'm referring to?
Yes.
I just kind of want an update on that and what your position is as far as members of the public feeling as though they are being censored. I don't know the backstory on that.
It's kind of a long backstory, and we can talk about it outside of this, but what happened was there was a group that wanted to disrupt the Southeast CPC because of the judge that was invited, and the judge that was invited presided over a controversial case. So the CPC itself decided that we're not going to invite that judge. The CPC also tried to make sure that, let me back up. There was a CPC member who was trying to censor the comments. The CPC itself decided that, no, that wasn't right, and they censored the CPC member. The CPC member, in turn, decided to resign from the board. That's the
That'll do. Thank you
shortest
so
explanation I
much.
can give you.
Thanks,
Oh,
Chris.
I have a, if I can add to this, just to clarify, I was at the CPC meeting in the Southeast when this occurred. At least the judge who was supposed to appear had been disinvited on the basis of not because of any action that she'd taken, but because of potential actions that might have been taken at the meeting. And so, rather than have an embarrassing or controversial situation at the meeting, it was asked that she not appear at the meeting so that wouldn't occur. It had nothing to do with the decision that she had made.
Right, right. And that's why I was trying to jog my memory, because so much has happened since then. And quite frankly, I'm very happy that the CPC worked it out amongst itself and figured it out, and we didn't have to step in. And the monitor was aware of this the whole time.
Any other questions for Chris? Thank you. Mr. Harness, CPOA.
Chair Waits, Honorable Board, good evening. I'll just follow up on Mr. Sylvan's comments regarding 252 and the Valley presentation. At the Policy Procedures Review Board, Commander Middleton referenced changes to the policy as it related to some of the defining definitions, that's redundant, the definitions within the policy that doing that presentation to the public, some members of the Valley caught that it would be better understood if certain language was incorporated in the policy, and they did actually incorporate that language to the policy as it was presented to PPRB. So that was a very positive outcome for everyone. We have presented our data as requested by the monitor for IMR 8, which that evaluation period closes at the end of July. National Night Out is August 7th. So if any of you want to participate in your local neighborhood as a representative of the Oversight Board, we would encourage, I'm sure the Outreach Committee would encourage you to do so. What was the date? August 7th. I have committed to going to the Southwest based upon the invitation that was given. So I will be representing the CPOA down at the Southwest. And I know Ms. Bustos will be somewhere in her neighborhood, and so just putting the word out for everyone on the POB that it is the 7th of August.
And we just do that through the area command?
Yes, you can do it through the area command, or you can do it through your neighborhood watch association, depending on who is putting together an event.
Okay.
My contract renewal is is projected to be on the agenda at the August 6th City Council meeting. So I plan on attending. As the city attorney stated, July 17th at 3 p.m. is our stakeholders briefing from APD. And then that's at the U.S. Attorney's Office. So if you're able to attend,
What date?
July 17th at 3 p.m. We will be getting an update as to the progress with the status report from the department, and that's part of their ongoing pledge to continually update all of the stakeholders. Any comments on the de-escalation policy 255 are due by tomorrow. So if you have comments on that policy, they need to be in to me by tomorrow. We have sent out 9 cases so far with our new mediation program. We've received 2 back. Neither one of them went to a formal mediation. One of them was informally resolved prior to the mediation being set up. And the other one, the citizen declined mediation, simply wanted the supervisors to be aware of the officer's behavior. So that has come back to me, and I have notified the area commander and the direct supervisor to counsel the officer involved, and then they will notify me when that counseling has taken place, and then we will close the loop on that one. I included in your packets an example of the Office of Police Accountability for Seattle, their findings, their analysis, and their recommendations. So as we move forward and we look at ways to make our operations more efficient, I think this is a shining example of how the Office of Police Accountability in Seattle can analyze a case, make a recommendation in a half a page.
Is the police accountability the same as the CPOA, or is that something within the department?
It is, it would be the equivalent of the CPOA.
Okay.
And we have everybody's confirmation for NACOL, so we'll be making those arrangements. And I stand for questions.
Any questions from Mr. Hunt?
So all of our investigators would use a format that would be the same for
Chair Waits, Vice Chair Galloway, this I think is an example of moving forward how we can be more concise with findings and recommendations. I think when you read through it, there isn't any confusion about what the allegations are, and they're framed in a nice neutral way. And then there's the analysis. And then in this case, it's all just policy recommendations. It's not findings, but certainly findings could be adopted or adapted into that as well. And what you have in front of you is a full quarter of recommendations.
But my question is that they'll all be uniform, like what we see in the responses that are going back to complainants, they would all be in a uniformed format?
That's the goal, yes.
Yes, thank you.
So that's what this is. This is what would go to the complainant? This is an example of that?
Chair Waits, Board Member Fine, that would be an example. So the first case there, that has a case number there, that would be the entire analysis and what would go to the citizen.
Okay. I need a chance to read it. We'll
Yeah,
talk about
and
it.
I just included it for our conversation moving forward as we look for efficiencies for our product.
And I'm sure we'll do that. We'll look at this and talk about it on the agenda for the case review committee.
Mr. Harness, just a quick question. I know the city council's not here tonight. Have you heard or have an understanding of when we're going to get our new members?
Chair Waits, my last conversation with Mr. Moya from when he was at the outreach subcommittee was that he hoped to have persons in place to observe this month and then, I'm sorry, to observe in August and then to be seated in September.
Now, we still want to have input or suggestions on who we, or a recommendation on who we get. Is that still possible?
Chair Waits, we did, not we, the board members at the outreach subcommittee did have those discussions with Mr. Moya, and he did take those into account along with the opportunity to sit with them prior to acceptance and so that they could grasp the responsibilities of being on this board.
Thank you. Any other questions for Mr. Harness? No? Thank you. Okay. Just my luck, I wouldn't lose my place. Reports from subcommittees, community outreach. Chantel?
Okay, so the outreach committee met last month. Topics of conversation were pretty much centered around just what you were asking about and the onboarding of new board members, but just kind of as a quick review, after meeting with Healthcare for the Homeless, which was arranged by Member Fine, Amanda Bustos from the CPOA office agreed to attend quarterly meetings with them, and so that's good. We're going to have a fixed presence there. Director Harness made a presentation to the Navajo Nations at the invitation of the city. There have been several media stories surrounding APD and things that are going on with them. They've included things like driving complaints, unfounded and false complaints that are coming, I believe, back to our offices, if I'm not mistaken, Director Harness, right?
Chair Fine, Vice Chair Galloway, the story regarding unfounded complaints is an ongoing project that they want to do a bigger long-term story, so it has not been done yet.
Okay, so they're working on that.
But it's in the works.
Okay, and then interviews with KOB and KRQE ahead of tonight's meeting, encouraging public comment and questions for the detective process within APD. Member Fine and Director Harness are going to participate in an interview with Pat Allen of KKOB on Wednesday, the 18th. That interview was set to air on the 21st, which is a Saturday, if anybody wants to tune in for that. Ms. Bustos has been working on getting new brochures for us and out into the community, and she needs to go through a 3-vendor kind of RFP process, and so she's in the middle of that right now, but I think we're hoping to have some progress made on that soon. I'm searching you out. I don't know where you've gone. As far as new board members go, we went through the selection process with Julian Moya, and we are going to move forward with a couple of board members meeting with prospective board members ahead of their confirmation by City Council to kind of try and give them a heads up as to what's to be expected by joining this body, answer any questions that they may have, and provide them with the context of what we do here. And hopefully that will help to just better prepare and provide those candidates with success for our board. And my understanding was that Julian had a couple of candidates in mind now. We've since lost, of course, another board member. But he's working on that, and he seems to be very much advocating for our involvement with prospective board members. So I'm happy to hear that. Our next meeting is going to be on July 24th at 2:30 in the hearing room of the Sunshine Building Group.
Okay, thank you, Chantel. Policy and procedure.
I think the subject's already been introduced, but I'm the chair of the Policy and Procedures Subcommittee, and there's been a lot of activity in the area of use of force, and I think that's what I'd like to focus this report on. It hasn't really been under the Policy and Procedure Subcommittee, or it hasn't been an activity of the subcommittee because I'm now the only member of the subcommittee. So I've been going to a lot of use of force meetings, and I know a lot of these folks over in this side of the room now reasonably well. And I think that as an observer of the process, I think that's one of the things that the POB brings to the process, is that as an oversight body, I think being present at the process is an important aspect of it, because I think you have an influence, an impact on it by our mere presence. So I think we've gotten inside of the process, and I think that's important. The other aspect is that APD now is cooperating and coming to our meetings as well. So we've had Commander Campbell and Jolene Luna, who's a civilian employee, attend policy meetings, and we have exchanged information, and I think that's to our benefit. We all are at the DOJ meetings, which is where the use of force suite has primarily, the origination of the rewrite, and a lot of the rewrite was done by the DOJ. And I think that it's useful to look for changes, indications that we are making progress in this. And I think we're making progress both in having a better process, a more publicly involved process, which is evidenced by the fact that I've got an example. The information that was given earlier about the incorporation of some clarifying language is one example of public input. But specifically mentioned that the meeting yesterday, or the day before yesterday, when Policy 252 went before the PPRB, was the incorporation of public comment that was made at this previous meeting in June by Alan Wagman and by Nancy Koenigsberg. So both of those comments were incorporated in one case. It was verbatim, essentially, from the public, and I think that's good. So I think that it's important to point out when the public actually sees the result of having participated in the process. I think it also results in a change in cultural attitude on the part of APD, and I think that's what we're after, because I think there's more reason, there's more acceptance of public input into the process. And I think the better the public input gets, then the more credibility the public has in this process. So I think those are all good things. I think then if you look at the result of the product, I think in 252, which is the use of force, sort of the base document here, there's a much more beyond constitutional standards of policing that in terms of the use of force, rather than being the maximum of force allowed under Graham, it's now been turned to focus more on the reasonable amount of force that would be used in order to deal with the situation. So I think that's a turnaround, and that's the primary reason that the DOJ came. So other aspects of the policy which I think have been improved is that it's more concise and it's more trainable. And I think this is what Commander Middleton has pointed out in his shepherding these policies through the OPA and through the PPRB. So those aspects of the policy have all been considered, and I think this is, we have something that I think we can be proud of in an improvement in terms of these, in terms of both the policy themselves, but in the ability to actually get them implemented and trained in APD. And ultimately, that's the result. I mean, it'll be tested by the results that occur, but I think all of the elements now are in place to make it happen that way. So I've got a number of other things that I could say that the policy subcommittee's been doing, but I think this is the important one, and I think that there's a plan now to get the whole use of force suite taken through the process, and we'll have a chance as a board to make recommendations in support or not of these policies. But at this point, I would like to recommend that the POB go on record as supporting this in principle, the basic rewrite of SOP 252, which was presented last month. So I'll leave it at that, and I'll stand for questions if there are any.
I don't have a question, but we do need to ask for volunteers to help on the Policy and Procedure Committee. Do we have any volunteers?
I'll step up to volunteer. I will as well.
Okay. Good, thank you. So we have two. Okay.
Thanks.
Okay.
Perhaps just some brief comments on your policy tracker that you and Dr. Verplu have
And your next meeting
worked
date.
on?
Now that we have new members, but now that we have a committee, we can call a meeting, and
Right.
the normal time has been a week after this committee meeting, so we can set our meeting date for next Thursday at what would be your preference? What time of day?
Figure it out later.
Oh,
But
to be
we-
determined.
To be determined, but next Thursday. So there is, thank you for that straight line, and I've been working on with Dr. Verplu, who's our on-contract data analyst, on having a tracking database so that we can keep track of these of the SOP progress through the system. And I think, I mean, in terms of policy, we'd like to think that we're here to make some policy recommendations, but in fact, there's already 100 policies in place or more that tend to overwhelm everyone else. So if we're going to do our job, I think we have to keep track of those, and so we've started working on creating a database that will allow us to do that. And we expect to share this information with APD. We won't try to get any information that we're not entitled to, but I think we would like to get as much information as possible so that we can keep track of these things. And that, I don't know why I raised that, because that's not really been a problem. We have a cooperative relationship with getting that kind of information. So now it's up to us to create some way of tracking these policies through the process and making sure that nothing falls through the cracks in terms of the ability of this board to make recommendations or do a review. I think one of the things that we need to be aware of is that not every policy is going to require a review, but that in itself requires an effort to determine what's an important policy from the standpoint of a public review, as opposed to something that's essentially an internal policy that APD operates by and is of sort of secondary interest to us. So those are just some of the problems associated with keeping track of what's going on in terms of policy.
Ready, thank you. Anything else? Any other comment? Okay. Case reviews subcommittee. Valerie?
Yes. Yes, we had our last meeting on June the 25th, 2008, to 3 to 5. We reviewed 14 cases. And out of those cases, 12 were moved to be put on the consent agenda. 1 was not sustained, and 1 was unfounded. Our next meeting is July the 31st, 2018.
July 31st?
Yes,
Okay. All righty. We don't have anyone from the Personnel Subcommittee, so we'll move on.
I'm on the committee, but Eric didn't tell me anything
Okay.
to say.
So we're fine, we're good there.
Did we, I'm sorry, may I?
Please.
Did we discuss, or did I think about this? the Personnel Subcommittee coming up with a job analysis or a jobs need analysis for an individual at the CPOA that would be a direct asset to the board for that. Did we
Direct
discuss
staff
that?
person.
Yeah.
Yeah, I believe that Eric was doing some work on that. We'll have to get in touch with him and find out
Okay.
what progress he made. I wasn't involved in that part. He was doing it to present to us and hasn't presented it to us, so I don't know.
And then if I can go back to one point.
Oh, please do.
We have, at the recommendation of Ms. Bustos, we occasionally get emails in from members of the community. And rather than having everybody on the board, open to responding to those individuals, she recommended that we have a point person. And I understand historically, Joanne, you have been that person to respond to individuals that come in from the community. And so my question is, one, do we want to continue to have one person be the kind of designated spokesperson? And then if so, if you would like to continue in that function?
I just want to be clear how this has worked. I've been asked by other chairs, before I was chair, and when Leonard was chair, and then when Beth was chair, to be the spokesperson for the POB. That doesn't preclude anybody from talking to the media if they wish. This is really a media-related thing. That's what it's been before.
Okay.
In terms of individual complainants that write to us, I think the policy has been, the practice has been that the staff deals with that first and then brings it to us as they see fit, that the appropriate way would be to make that complaint or whatever to the staff. And so I have not done that with individuals, but I have done it with the media. And again, that it's important to say that doesn't preclude anybody on the board from speaking to the media. It just means you got somebody to hand it off to if you don't want to.
I think that the idea that she was bringing to me, though, didn't have anything to do with the media. It was like emails that come to us from members of the community. That's my understanding.
I've not done that before.
No.
Okay, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, getting back to Ms. Fine's conversation, I think having a point person for the media is important. But as far as what you're talking about, I think anyone can do that.
I'm fine with that.
Okay.
Okay.
Mr. Harness, is it not your preference that you deal with those things first?
Yes,
Yeah.
So that's why that was the practice
Right.
in doing that.
Just so long as we have a direction that we're going to go with, that was the recommendation, that we come up with a direction and have somebody who is going to respond to those. I'm completely comfortable if that's you.
I can tell you from a historical perspective, we have some people who, we as board members, especially with turnover on the board, would not necessarily know that this is somebody who's had a history with the CPOA, and we don't know all that history if we try to explain, so I think makes more sense for the director to do it, or to designate it to his staff, and then let us know if we need to be engaged at that point.
Yeah, I
Okay.
agree with that.
Okay.
Yeah, I'd just like to make a comment about spokesperson for the board. I think the model for this board is that there is no spokesperson for the board. I think that this is a city council kind of model. I think that every board member is selected independently, and their board members do not represent the board view. They represent essentially the community view, because we represent the community and not the board. So I think that every board member is entitled to speak just as a city councilor would speak to his constituency.
Absolutely.
Or in any other capacity. The chair, for example, of the city council does not speak for the city council outside of the city council. The chair runs the meetings and it facilitates the discussion. But in terms of a public spokesperson, there's no one who is selected from the council as a spokesperson for the council, and I think that's the model that we should follow, and I think that's what we're supposed to follow. So that's my view on it. As far as other responses, I think that in terms of the agency, then I think it's Director Harness, or the director of the agency, should be the person who takes responsibility for that.
Chelsea?
I think it might be useful to clarify how I interpret your question is when we receive community feedback, how do we ensure that we are being responsive to that feedback? And might it be useful to have an idea of who should be responsible for responding, only to ensure that we get it done, not to elevate the voice among any other voice, having nothing to do with who can and cannot speak to the media. The answer would be any member can speak to the media, of course. But I think that if I'm understanding Ms. Galloway, the question is, how do we make sure we are being responsive to things we're getting from the community? And might it be useful to have someone volunteer to be the initial point of contact? I don't know what the best method is, but I think that if I understand Ms. Galloway, that's the issue at hand that we should kind of, so maybe we could shake that out if anyone has any ideas, because I think that's important that we are able to respond to community members.
Any other comment?
Again, I mean, if the board decides, I'm completely comfortable with directing all of that to Director Harness.
Yeah, once again, I
It's
will
up to
reiterate,
you.
I think all those should go to Director Harness because he's been here, he knows the history, he knows who we're dealing with, he knows, you know, if there's anything pending against us with this individual.
Well, the simplest way to do this, if there needs to complete the loop, which I'm hearing Chelsea say, is since we are contacted through the POB email and Director Harness takes the lead on what happens with that, he could just close the loop by telling us what happened, by copying us and telling us what happened. And that completes the loop. So, you know, I'm cool with that. And I think these two things are separate from each other.
They
Yes.
are, very much.
They're not the same thing.
Nope.
And so, you know,
Okay.
wherever you want to go with it is fine with me.
Chair Waits, I think that this came up based upon email correspondence individually from POB members where the POB members weren't necessarily seeing the communications going back and forth between the POB member and the civilian that was communicating with the board. And my concerns were that I think in at least two of the cases, it involved ongoing cases and ongoing investigations where we didn't have any real conclusions or any real insight. Certainly, I can direct the communications so that everyone has a chance to see it, and then I think that one of the fears was setting up some sort of a rolling quorum if there's 2 or 3 or 4 responses. But I mean, so that's the thing that we need to be leery of. But obviously, I don't want to interfere with your communication with the community. It's just a matter of a process as opposed to coming into the office and then there's 3 emails to one person from overnight.
Yeah, why don't we go, Chelsea?
Director Harness, I'm not sure if we might all be talking about different things here. Maybe it's useful to suss this out. I'm wondering about, we recently received an email from a former board member, Mr. Larson, and I'm wondering how we just make sure that we acknowledge that communication. What do we do on our end to make sure that, you know, everyone has taken note and we, you know, whatever decisions are made are communicated back to the person? Like, how do we bolster or support that type of communication?
Well, Chair Waits, Board Member Van Deventer, I was trying to avoid addressing one specific instance. So certainly dependent on who it's addressed to. I believe that particular email was addressed to the chair, the vice chair, and I think I was just CC'd on it. So, you know, the parties, the parties that it's addressed to, I guess, would be the responsible parties to acknowledge receipt of, and whatever those concerns were, to address those concerns in whichever fashion they so choose. So I guess what I'm trying to prevent is that, you know, 3 or 4 different board members respond to the same email, no matter who it comes from.
For clarification, it wasn't that specific email, but we receive emails from individuals who are seeking help and guidance and assistance from the board on cases that they have going. Those are the emails that kind of preempted this conversation, and specific board members responding to those, and whether or not they are something we should be dealing with at all. In situations like that, I'm completely comfortable with somebody acknowledging that we have received that and that we have directed it off to the CPOA offices. But I don't think that everybody needs to respond with how to handle those situations.
Well, first of all, if we all respond, it's a violation of Open Meetings Act, correct? As a rolling quorum.
Which is how this got into.
So that,
They're
yeah,
talking about this.
okay, so, let's do this. Let's put a motion in play.
Let me say something. I think in the past, when someone has emailed everyone in regards to a question about a pending case, Director Arnest handles that. We have no knowledge what the status is and what's going on. So we never really responded because I know he does.
And this isn't pending case issues. These are people asking for help and for investigations to take
Oh,
place.
then Director Harness, he does refer him and he responds.
Do you get all email communication that's addressed to POB@CABQ?
Yeah.
Perfect.
Yep.
Might I just make one follow-up comment? Chair Waits, Vice Chair Galloway. Let me clarify that I'm not trying to elevate any particular correspondence communications. That was just, we get emails of that nature fairly frequently. I mean, I'd say we get a handful a month. That was the most recent email of that nature that we've gotten, raising a few issues, wanting to know maybe how we could address those. And so it's not about any particular correspondence, not in the slightest. It's just when we get something like that, raising issues, raising questions, how can we be sure that we have organized ourselves such that we have provided a response, or we have an opportunity to contemplate and consider those things that have been raised. Nothing to do with who has sent the correspondence, certainly.
And the barrier we have to that is the Open Meetings Act.
Okay.
And so the practical reality is we can't all respond, we can't even have it all addressed to us and respond. Otherwise, it's a violation of the Open Meetings Act. So it is the most logical thing, in my view, for it to go to Director Harness, and if you want him to close the loop with us, copy us back when the thing's resolved and tell us what happened.
Okay. Any other comment? Let's put a motion in play to do that, okay?
So then I would move that Director Harness be responsible for responding to any and all communication that comes to the POB via email, and that you would follow up with us in a timely manner, whatever the appropriate timeliness would be, within a week, perhaps.
Can I get a second?
And I second that.
All right, it's been motioned and second. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, good. Let's move on to our discussions. Mr. Harness, I guess we want to include on the oversight ordinance amendments. We want to discuss that in our discussion. Can you kind of give us an overview on that?
Yes, Chair Waits, because the ordinance amendments for the oversight ordinance are due to come in front of the Finance and Government Committee in mid-August. Julian Moya and Chris Melendrez suggested that if there were any other issues or amendments, that there was time to get them in and get them before the City Council to be considered at the Finance and Government Subcommittee. So knowing that there were some, we put this on the agenda to see if there were other recommendations for amendments to the oversight ordinance.
Any comments on that or recommendations?
I have a question, and this marked up copy that we have is the copy that was originally approved by or recommended by the board a year ago or so, or does this include some more recent suggestions?
Chair Waits, Board Member Dr. Cass, those are the changes as we discussed them with the city councilors and as they were drafted by Mr. Melendrez from the City Council.
Originally? Is that what
Yes.
you mean?
And,
Or recently?
and so do you have the recent changes that have been suggested that you referred to?
Chair Waits, Board Member Dr. Cass, the recent changes that were discussed were never incorporated into or passed by the board. So these are the changes from the original recommendations from July, I believe, of 2017. There weren't any other more recent changes except for drafting language, but the concepts for data and for non-concurrence hearings and those proposed changes are the ones that you have before you.
But you referred to if there was any more possible changes that we should be able to do that still on this cycle with this introduction. And so I guess I'm asking, is there anything ready that we want to include that hasn't, that isn't in here already? So.
Chair Waits and Board Member Dr. Cass, that's exactly what I'm asking. Do you want to propose any now?
And how long do we have to do that? It sounds like we have about 15 minutes.
Yeah.
Well, Chair Waits and Board Member Dr. Cass, I know that there have been other changes contemplated and they have been discussed. And so if you want to bring them forward for the board to recommend, then this would be the time.
We have nothing before us.
Well, the problem with this is we have nothing before us, and we discussed the previous language for people who are finishing a term for the other one, that they cannot run again. And then I also had an issue, and I was waiting to bring this up, but we have 15 minutes. A few months ago, at one of our meetings, we voted for a position on the policy procedure. And so Dr. Cass won. But if you look at and then I start to thinking about the history in the past, we didn't do that every year. A person who was voted for that position, as far as my understanding is, you're welcome to correct me, they stayed on until they left. And all of a sudden, we voted for Dr. Cass, and I was going to bring this up at a time, are we going to make this yearly? Are we going to let this person stay on until they leave? Or I just wanted some clarification on that.
On
I'm
the
so sorry.
chairmanship
On
of
the
the,
chair, yeah, we don't have any.
The chair of the committees?
Right.
Okay, thank you.
Because remember a few months ago, Dr. Cass made a motion that he, to run for chair, and we voted that was okay, but I was reviewing the ordinance, and then I got to thinking on previous board members who were chairs, there was never a time limit.
That's part of the
And
policy.
all
the
of a sudden-
policies and our
Yeah.
policy and procedures would be able to give us guidance on that.
So, fellow board member St. John, Chair Waits, Vice Chair Galloway, the fixes, if we decided we wanted to change some of those things,
Right.
are not found within the ordinance. So they are found in our policies and procedures. And all we have to do to change our policies and procedures are, essentially all we have to do is put the items on the agenda and provide more notice than we normally do under, like, for example, the Open Meetings Act. And so that wouldn't be relevant to the question of are there any further amendments to the ordinance?
Okay, I didn't
Because
know,
that
that's
stuff
what
is not in the ordinance, it's in the procedures.
Okay, that's what I didn't understand, if that would have to be okayed by the city council if we had to change that in the ordinance.
No, we can just
Board
change it in
Member
the
St. John, we can do that
All right,
ourselves.
thank you.
Sure.
I would say that relative to additional changes to the ordinance, if, I'm not comfortable voting on things that are not in front of me. So I would suggest if we only have 15 minutes that we use that to recommend the changes that we all agreed to already, because I'm not willing to guess on what the other changes might be. I think I'm suggesting that we go forward with the ones we know we wanted made, and go there and bring it back to us another time
Okay.
when we have something in front of us.
I'd like to second that idea, if it's not already a motion. I
Sure, I'll
think
make
it
it a
should be a
motion.
motion, but I think it makes sense to go with what we have and then put together a subsequent package. I think there'll be enough changes, but this has gone on for a year now that the initial changes were recommended. The process has been going on, and I'd hate to see it interrupted by some last-minute additions to that. So I think the sensible thing to do would be to do what Member Fine suggested, so.
So
agree.
that's my motion and his second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right, let's move on. All right. One of the things what's been really important to us tonight was APD detective and their selection policies, and we'd like to learn more about that process. I know I've read where APD has admitted some wrong detectives interviewing the Martin's case, and I'd like to get a better understanding. Do we have someone from APD that could possibly give us some insight on that?
Can I ask
Ms. Fine?
As a precursor to that, I think that I had some questions in it. I think it fits best here, but I wanted to bring those questions up. It's not just the Victoria Martins case. I think we should look at a bigger lens. Omari Varela preceded Victoria Martins, and James Stewart's daughter, the 7-year-old, comes after that. So for me, I'm interested in knowing what we have learned systemically about these particular cases, and I realize 2 of those cases happened before this administration, I understand, but from the community standpoint, we have an obligation to look at systems that are failing or having difficulty and try to figure out what they are, and I'm suggesting that that conversation not just focus on Victoria Martins, but on the bigger picture of these cases, which are a serial set of cases with, I presume, similar people doing the investigations. So that's my first question. What have you learned? What can you tell us about what you've learned and what's coming in the future? How are we going to make this better? And one of the questions is, since 2 of those child cases are homicides, is it in fact true that there are only 5 detectives in the homicide division at this moment? And is that sufficient, not sufficient? What's happening relative to that? I have more questions after that, but let me stop there.
I have a point of order. I think we should, I would like to see us stick to the agenda item, which is APD selection, detective selection and training. And if board members have questions after that presentation, then I think we should have a organized round of asking those questions.
Okay.
But I think this is becoming a free-for-all, and I think that it's not on the agenda in that form.
Let's do this. We will follow the agenda, okay? So, Chief, the question is, your selection and how you select your detectives and the type of training that you give them to be detectives. So let's start there.
Can we also include in there what the requirements are of those officers to become detectives?
Chairman Waits and Vice Chairman Galloway, not sure of the language. I'll kind of go historically, and then I'll have Commander Duran kind of fill in if there's been any changes. But basically, at the earliest stages of somebody that's in their career pathing wants to become a detective, they can take certain training classes that are offered through the Advanced Training Academy. This can range from interview and interrogation to crime scene techniques to other aspects of forensic interviewing, such as watching body language and whatnot, to help an investigator determine if someone's telling the truth, or be able to elicit information from not only offenders but from witnesses as well. And so those are early type of classes. Criminal investigation classes are also part of that too. But that's on the officer's selection, and that's on their own choice if they want to get that as a precursor. Usually what we're trying to do now with the career pathing is have that part of a prerequisite, so to speak, before they can even apply for one of the, I want to say, lower level detective positions. Not by lower level, I don't mean less important, but these are the impact, which are usually the first detective positions that officers get in the department. These are the ones that work in the area commands. They handle generally more, they're more of a generalist. They handle the lower level crimes, you know, everything from property crimes, shoplifting, burglaries, domestic violence where there's not serious injury or serious offense. It's kind of like an apprenticeship, because that's usually where detectives first start their training. When in there, they can get additional training. What we'd like to do is have a set of requirements to include certain training classes in that level, as well as a predetermined time, like a set period of 2 or 3 years that you have to be in that position before you could test for, say, board member Fine, you remember at the criminal investigations, they have sex crimes and robbery units and domestic violence units. Not that that's a higher level, but that's more of a centralized specialty area, which is considered a little bit more because you're getting more assignments from throughout the whole city as opposed to just one area command. We want to, again, have them have even more advanced training to get to those levels and to even apply for it. So right now, there are, when circulars go out, there are certain requirements. You have to have served as a non-probationary officer, and maybe that's about it for some of these positions. Usually when they do their selection process, they look at for those requirements, but it's not formalized. So in terms of the direction we're going, Chairman Waite, you had mentioned that. That's one of the directions, is we want to have that formalized and that process set up. As they get through those other positions, traditionally there's a kind of a hierarchy, some of the more serious crimes being at the top, obviously homicide being that crime. You wouldn't want somebody that has just come from patrol to become a homicide detectives. You want that there to be a series of steps where they gain that experience, whether it's not just writing search warrants and arrest warrants, but it's investigating crimes, doing a certain number of interviews, interrogations, having that experience to witness and be part of those investigations over a period of time. It's like any other job. You gain more insight and with experience and exposure to those type of situations. So I think that that's another area to formalize it. So there will be a hierarchy of training that carries with it set experience. Unfortunately, in the past, and it's the testing process itself, it's very limited. It's a knowledge-based test, for example, on policies, and it doesn't really go in depth in terms of the different areas of focus for a specific position other than the policies that relate to it. And it's kind of a rote memory test. One of the things we're looking at is more of a knowledge-based test, maybe through a written exam or an oral board type exam, as well as actually some type of hands-on assessment in terms of actually writing a search warrant, preparing a mock case, or well as a mock interview, so we can see them in person. We do this for promotions where we get more of a chance to get insight in that person's qualifications. In the past, and I regret to say this sometimes, but it's sometimes if you're friends with people in certain units, you have an inside track. And we want to make sure it's a fair process that starts with the first level of interest. As a young officer may have that interest when he comes in the department. He knows he has to wait a few years. He can start preparing himself by taking those classes We also have training materials and people that can serve as mentors for those people as well. They can do what they call temporary duty assignments, and they can help in those units, not as the investigator, but by being observers and maybe doing canvasses, let's say at a homicide scene, so they can actually see how the process works. So the idea is not just to take people out of the blue and place them in these assignments. We want to prepare them so that they are well-trained. So when they get to those higher levels, it's not an expedited process by any means, as they've earned that position. And again, throughout this whole process, each assignment has a year probation. So if they don't cut the mustard, so to speak, or they don't see that it's the right job for them, or they're whatever other thing that may happen where they're not meeting the requirements, we can pull them from that particular assignment during that probation period. So that, again, kind of a fail-safe method so that we're not getting some people that are just going to find a niche and hopefully stay there so they don't have to take calls as a patrol officer on the street. I think that by having those systems in place, you know, the true selection process and then a preparation and training apprentice. We also want it for in-service. We want to increase. We've looked online, did some research just recently since this last incident, that there's training classes across the nation. There's actually some online, but there's actually some good training classes that are done by other departments across the nation. There's specialties training that's done by like the psychologists and psychiatric aspects of interviewing and things like that, which we really haven't had in any great detail. But again, it's be like a college education. You start with the 100 levels and you build up to the higher or even graduate type levels. Another area that, and I just lost my train of thought a little bit, is with the, right now with our CIT program, they do, I think it's monthly training through a Project ECHO. And what that is it's a class, where it's a session where they have a meeting and they do like the case reviews of other cases to see what's best practices from within the community, area departments, but the ECHO project has now gone worldwide. So they'll have specialties speaks from other departments even across the world on this mental health issues, behavioral health issues. We'd like to see that kind of concept with, say, homicide cases is where we, or even child abuse cases, where when we have these kind of cases come forth that we've never experienced before, or with that even we just are looking for insight, we can present that at a kind of it's a teleconference type setting, and we can get other insight beyond just what we can get through book knowledge or through seminars or training, advanced training classes that we put on. We can kind of get insight from experts in other fields. I know NYPD uses a concept similar where they train their detectives through that kind of same type of process. So, I mean, this is the plan for the future. Right now, and I know that one of the questions was how many homicide detectives, and it kind of leads into this is because we really want to build that put people in homicide, but we don't want to just pull people now that aren't quite ready for it. So we're going to have maybe a process when they may get selected based on their skill sets now, the basic skill sets, but they won't become true homicide detectives, and where they'll be doing the interviews until they've had that kind of experience and mentorship from people who are in there for a period of time. The goal, hopefully, is that we build a quality career pathing for people so that some people don't want to be promoted, they don't want to be supervisors, some people don't want to be patrol officers, some people don't want to be traffic officers, some want to be detectives. And so we want to build their skill set from the first time they become a detective to when they leave their career and retire, that hopefully it's a career path that may be a lifetime path so that they use that experience and we have a better chance of serving the public by having qualified people in those positions. I'm going to let Commander Duran add anything that may be current in terms of what the current plans are, but if you want to step up.
Chair Waits and board members, what we have going on right now currently, just to expound on what the chief is talking about, is just this week we created a working group to address some of these training issues. In the past, when a detective came on, historically they were assigned to a senior detective. What happened from that point is for a period of 1 year, they're evaluated continually. They pretty much shadow that senior detective until that detective and the sergeant feel that the detective is learned enough and is proficient enough to do the job on his own, and at that point they'll normally turn him loose. But like the chief stated, and just to reiterate, it's a 1 year probation type deal where they're evaluated continually. What we're doing now to move forward is the training that they've received has not been standardized or formalized across the board, and I think the chief mentioned and touched on that. So just this week, we created a working group to look at a needs assessment and see what training needs detective need to start at a baseline. So what we're looking to create is baseline training for the detective coming in off the street. And that's ranging from search warrant writing to interview and interrogation to arrest warrant writing, search and seizure, everything that's basic, just the baseline. And we're looking to create the curriculum to go along with that. Working in conjunction with that, we're also reviewing our current policies because some of the policies aren't necessarily up to date or current practice. So the purpose of this working group is to look at the policies, evaluate them, bring those policies up to date, and in conjunction with the needs that we assess that we're going to need. From the baseline level that we want to push out for the general detective, the generalist detective, we want to look at what needs each individual specialized unit needs and start looking at a training needs assessment for each unit individually and create a curriculum and a training regimen for that as well. So that's kind of where we sit right now. Like I stated, we had our first meeting this week. We're going to meet weekly, and hopefully we can progress forward and address the SOP changes and create standardized training for the whole department.
Any questions?
Yes, what is the set of SOPs that covers this? I mean, is it particular to a homicide division or to what kinds of investigations? I mean, I'm just curious as to where to look at, where to find the information that describes the process or what you have on paper, in paper right now. So
Chair Waits and Board Member Dr. Cass, what we have right now is it varies. There's some SOPs that may be within our administrative orders that dictate interview and interrogation. There may be orders that are more specialized to criminal investigations or special investigations division. And in those cases, it specializes a little bit more about call-out procedures, how detectives will handle the call-outs, case responsibility, who the case responsibility is going to go to. So it varies. There's policies in different places. And what we're looking to do is have that continuity between each policy that does touch on investigations. That way each policy, or one doesn't contradict the other.
That's an ongoing problem, I think. Thank you.
Chelsea?
What was your name again, officer?
Alderan.
Commander, sorry about that. Commander Duran. Okay, so it sounds like we are kind of starting from scratch, are we not? We have 5 detectives in the homicide unit. Is that a number you can verify?
Chair Waits and Board Member Van, I don't want to butcher your last name.
Yeah, you could just call me Van. It's Van Deventer, though.
There are not 5 detectives. There are 10 detectives currently in the homicide unit as we speak. We're looking to bring over or bring back a seasoned detective that worked in homicide for years, hopefully as early as next week. So we're slowly increasing those numbers. We're looking at other options to bring back even other retired homicide detectives to help and assist our homicide unit, whether it be in the aspect of case overview or case review, or just looking at it with the fresh set of eyes from an investigator who's not directly involved with the case.
Okay, Commander, what happens? So we have 10 homicide detectives, and we have a number of, I would assume, many more open homicide cases in APD. When does a homicide case move from sitting within the jurisdiction of APD directly over to the district attorney's office? When do you guys say, hey, this isn't my homicide, this is their homicide? When does that happen?
That occurs once the investigation is complete.
Okay, what does that mean?
So the investigator at that point has exhausted all his investigative leads, and he either feels that they've got sufficient evidence to turn the case over to the district attorney's office, either for a grand jury indictment or an arrest warrant. These days, the current practice is, once they do get to that point in time, they're seeking arrest warrants. They seek the arrest warrant, and they transfer that over to the DA's office. That being said, once the case is transferred over to the DA's office, the current practice and what we're doing now is they're meeting weekly with the DAs. And the reason for that, they go over cases from the previous week. What the DA's office does is they assign an assistant district attorney on the spot so that the investigators have direct access to that assistant district attorney. From that point forward, the investigator is in constant communication with the DA's office and the assistant district attorney who's assigned to the case. They continue to work together and they see the case through until adjudication. So that's currently how we're working it.
Okay, so upon an indictment, for example, does APD only play a backup role to the district attorney?
That depends on the case itself. So if the assistant district attorney is in need of other or additional investigation, they'll reach back out to us and we'll conduct that investigation. So the DA is not left alone. We continue to communicate, we continue to help out. Like I stated before, when the investigator turns the case over to the district attorney's office, they believe that they have enough. But that's not always the case. Maybe the assistant district attorney may look at the case and say, we need phone records or we need this. And at that point, they reach back out to the investigator. They continue to communicate. The investigator gets involved again and provides what's needed for that case.
Okay, let me just back up 2 steps. Okay, so we talked about the process of becoming a detective, which right now sounds like it is essentially non-procedural. It's, you know, you can volunteer to take some classes and apply for a job, and then when you move to a new position, just like when you move to any position in government, you are on a 1-year probation period. What happens when you are a detective? Let's talk about the process of being a detective. Is there any sort of, you know, training, like a certified training that a detective does, so that when they have to make these very crucial decisions, evidentiary decisions, decisions to ask a judge for a warrant, what have you, they have, you know, a very good foundation or a sufficient or adequate foundation upon which to base those decisions? What exists when you are a detective?
So right now, there is no formal training for them to attend or learn from. It's basically on-the-job type deal. But once again, that's why we're creating this working group now so that we can standardize and formalize that and provide them that training, that advanced training as they go forward in their careers. The way it's been in the past historically is the knowledge that they gain is based on training opportunities that they seek out for themselves and they attend.
Okay, so if you sort of stand out, you might get the job. But then once you have the job, there is nothing what makes a detective position stand out amongst the rest? Is there anything particular about being a detective besides the title?
No, that's basically what it is. They leave field services, street patrol, they move over to whatever unit as an investigator, and they take the title detective.
Okay, and then what sort of support, when you are a detective, what sort of support do you have within the ranks? You know, a detective is not necessarily the very upper echelon of the entire hierarchy amongst the department. So who oversees you and what type of training do they have? And just tell me generally about the type of support you have in your position as a detective at APD.
So that is one thing that we're really good at, is the units tend to support each other. When an investigator goes to a specialized unit, he or she is working for a sergeant as they would in field services. And that sergeant is the one that oversees the case management, oversees what training gets attended, and provides whatever resources and support the detectives need.
Okay, and it sounds like this might be something that's in the works, but along the same lines, but yet again separately, child abuse cases. That seems like it would be an area that would require very specialized training. Would you agree?
Yes, and our detectives do attend specialized training in regard to forensic interview of children, safe houses, how to detect that behavior in children. So there is a higher level of education that the crimes against children detectives do undergo.
Okay, and is this required? Is this a job requirement for a detective, like a crimes against children detective? It's a necessary thing that they must do to maintain their employment, or is it something kind of like what we heard earlier, which is, you know, if you volunteered, then that's good, but...
It's rather the latter. It's not mandated. It's something that when they come to the unit, the sergeant or the lieutenant have a certain set of standards that they want their detectives to meet in order to move forward within the unit. And so at the detective's early stages of becoming a detective, they send them to those trainings. Like I stated, whether it be forensic interviewing or safe house interviewing, whatever the case may be, they get sent to that training.
Okay, and I'm almost done here. I have 2 more questions, essentially. When we're talking about differentiating a detective from a field officer, is there an internal promotional structure? Is a detective a lateral transfer, or are they receiving a raise? What does that look like?
It's a lateral transfer from the field to investigations.
Okay.
And there is no promotion or raise involved.
So it's promotion, it's a nominal promotion. It only changes your title, but not your stature otherwise.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. And then my last question is, can you tell me about how detectives interact with crime scene unit specialists, and how does that communication, how is it managed?
So typically on a call out, the lieutenant from criminalistics responds, as well as the lieutenant from violent crimes and the 2 sergeants. When they're on scene, they brief before they actually walk through the scene, and then they do a walkthrough of the scene. As they process the scene, detectives and criminalistic detectives work hand in hand to decide what evidence, if any, needs to be collected and how they're going to process the scene. So they are working together on scene to process that.
Okay, so how do you decide something is a crime scene? Like if there's if you go to, some location and there is something that is described as, possibly evidentiary, how does an officer determine does that become a crime scene? How does an officer decide whether or not we need a crime scene unit specialist in order to process the evidence that may or may not exist at that location?
They need more information than just there's blood on the concrete or whatever the case may be. They've got something, they have to have information for them to proceed forward and identify the crime scene. But a crime scene can be anything as a shoplifting. It just depends on the magnitude of the crime scene when they're going to make it a full-blown criminalistics call-out. And there is procedure in place for that. I don't know specifically what the procedure is, but for them to call out criminalistics, we do have policy as to what that may be.
Okay, and does a detective have the necessary latitude to turn any scene that he or she sees fit into a crime scene so that evidence may be processed?
Absolutely. Typically what happens is they'll communicate with their sergeant, who then in turn communicates with either the sergeant or the lieutenant from the crime lab. They confer. Typically they'll come out, they'll take a look, and then they make the determination whether to make it a full criminalistics call out or not.
Thank you.
All right, Joanne, Ms. Fine.
I'd like to know if you believe that as a department, obviously we all know that the department is short-staffed, but relative to the whole, do you believe you have enough detectives? There could be things that affect it, like retirement, and it sounds like there's a process to become more adept and therefore a detective something of a higher skill level. So my question is, what's the ratio? Are we at the right place in terms of number of detectives? And is it just we have to work to get up to the place we need to be? Where are we And how short are we of that goal?
So I don't have the exact numbers. I do know that we're working to fill those positions, and I also can tell you that one of the initiatives that I'm hoping to accomplish here soon is I'd like to conduct that research and see what the best practice is for a proper caseload for a detective to handle. I just don't have the specific numbers right now.
We've heard some talk from Director Harness about a detective bureau, and I'm not exactly sure why that's different. But perhaps you can tell us what a detective bureau would be, and it doesn't sound like you have that here. Is there a reason you don't have that?
We do have a detective bureau, and it falls under Deputy Chief Gonzalez.
Okay.
And it's broken down into 3 divisions, one of them being the Special Investigations Division, my division, which is Criminal Investigations Division, and then we have the Criminalistics Division. Within each division, there are detectives and specialized units that address the different crimes within the city. So we do have a detective bureau.
Okay. I was told that my question, I have 2 questions. The reason why this is important to us and why it was on the agenda, and I was told to ask my question in this area, is because of these cases that we've had in the community. That's why we are looking for a systemic understanding of things that we see in the community. And in particular, I think the community is very concerned, and I'm sure the police department is too, about these cases that I mentioned before. And my question has to do with a systemic question, saying, what have we learned from one case in the extreme to another? What does that tell us about what kind of skill sets we need to have? Do we have enough? Do we not have enough? Where are we short? Systemically, what are we looking at? Because all of us in the community, I'm sure, including the police department, is concerned about these horrible crimes that we're hearing about that affect children. So I just want to know what your assessment is as it relates to detectives or any infrastructure to make this better moving forward.
Board Member Fine, one thing that we learned, I know you mentioned 3 specific cases, and I'll start with the most recent. That one did happen in 2017. When that came out earlier this year, in the middle of around April or May, what we did in response to that was we evaluated the policies. And we had found out that some of the policies were deficient, which didn't give the officers much guidance in that situation. Or they were, in one case, there was a retention policy. And again, these are subject to interpretation because policy is a general guideline. The retention policy of on body-worn cameras. And so if there was no crime during that 120-day period, there was an automatic delete. We've changed those policies in response to that to make sure that those kind of problems don't happen again. Those are specifically in the crimes against children area and as well as for field officers in terms of, I believe it was Board Member Van Deventer that brought up about crime scenes. And a crime scene obviously can be anything from, you know, when we go to a burglary and we take fingerprints and that's given to detectives afterwards, to a crime scene as large as, say, the West Mesa burial site of the murder victims out there. So it's kind of individualized, but we're looking at those policies. The other 2, I know after the Omari case, there was a commission, and that one came up as well in this, and we've looked at some of the recommendations, and actually we're following quite a few of those as it stands now. The case that's right now with Martin's is now we're learning those lessons. It's just the first time it's been brought to our attention, and some of us have been through the briefings in terms of from where this started to where it's at now and how things have gone wrong. And I think one of the problems that was identified with that particular case is when you have child cases resulting in death and when you have homicides, there's 2 different units that can handle that investigation. And I'm not saying that there was conflict between them, but there is a decision as to which one is better qualified to handle, say, a child death. In this case, it seems like most of the attention went to the homicide unit. And not that they're any less qualified because it is a homicide scene and there's a death, but it seems like in the prosecutions, and I know one of the board members was talking about what happens after we finish our investigation. Those cases went to child abuse, relatively inexperienced child abuse prosecutors. And normally, a more seasoned homicide prosecutor for the more violent crimes would be doing just what Commander Durand inferred, is that they would look at our case. We don't prosecute the case. That's, in the legal system, we do get it at least up to the standard of probable cause, but you need proof beyond a reasonable doubt. And it's up to them to evaluate our case and say, you need to re-interview this witness. You need to go back and look at this evidence. We need to get phone records. We need to do a number of different tests to solidify the case before they would even be able to start to prosecute. I think that was failing there, and we've worked with the DA, Raul, in terms of that. We've also trying to get, in some cases, we want to have a kind of a quality assurance. And I know you mentioned, or was mentioned too, about what happens in terms of how cases review. I think it was with the sergeants and the support systems. And we do have lieutenants that also review the cases as well, but we want to have a quality control. I think Commander Durand alluded to it in terms of maybe some outside eyes to take a sampling of cases and make sure that we're doing all that from inside APD, not just depending on somebody else to do that. The DA's office doesn't really have investigators that do a lot to each cases because they're shorthanded. I know he's getting more money and support for that, but we need to be able to, that's one of the lessons learned, is when it's submitted at that point, that's not the end of the case. And typically, for us, sometimes that is the finishing point if we don't hear anything for any period of time. So we have to be able to revisit it from our end and not depend on somebody else. I think we have a good working relationship with the current DA that will be able to make sure that that happens and we don't miss anything. I know in some cases there is a delay in terms of getting DNA evidence or things. There is a delay, but at least we should have a standardized practice or protocol through the training and through the investigative protocol in our policy that at least make sure we cover that. For example, in a missing person cases, we just don't make a couple calls to say, hey, has anybody seen them? We'll go through everything from, have they bought bus tickets, their credit cards, have they, there's a whole protocol that we look to make sure that we don't miss things, and we'd like to see that somewhat of a checklist process. There's no one checklist, no one size fits all these cases. There's always going to be some gaps, but the more we learn from each one, the Martin's case being the most significant, you have needs for training in terms of interviewing people that maybe have behavioral health or mental health issues that are portraying themselves as making a statement or volunteering statements, and we're really kind of at fault if we're leading them on without knowing that we're not understanding that process. That's the kind of new training that's out there, I think, that we have to look at. This is relatively new in the world of investigations. Mental health is now being addressed in terms of on many other fronts, but not so much in just investigations, but through projects like the Innocent Project and things like that, where you see people that have done just that and have admitted the crimes, whatever, or have been accused and not denied it. We want to be able to get into that, and again, we're sensitive to the needs of that community as well. So I think that's the direction we want to go, is to keep getting officers trained on that. There's a lot of lessons to be learned from Victoria Martins. We haven't even begun to look at the policies until we don't want to compromise the case or whatever by being too, releasing too much now, but we're going to look at every policy, we're going to look at every procedure, every training aspect, so that we can avoid this kind of tragedy.
And of those three cases, how has those three cases, or the reality of those three cases, affected your relationship with CYFD and the processes involved in that? What's the takeaway for the police department?
Board Member Fine, we've actually strengthened the relationships. We've had a good relationship. They've been part of the Family Advocacy Center for a long time. We strengthened them. We're working with Monique Jacobson, their director right now. They've set up a lot of training for not just the porthole, but other aspects, and I know we've attended the first round of that at the very least. We're guaranteed continuing training. We're working more hand in hand with review of outstanding cases in child abuse realm right now using the state police. I think that takeaway is that, yes, we may be overstaffed, that's not an excuse. We may be overworked, and that's not an excuse. We have to have those backup systems to make sure that nothing falls through the crack in the future. I can't guarantee anything the way, the world is today. There's always that we cover everything, and then there's that next exception. But I think if we go in that direction, learning from those three, and they're each different in their own right, I think that'll give us a good start and a good foundation to work from.
I have just one more question, and that has to do with the evidence I'm sure this is critical to everything you do. But in the journal, it talked about the timeline of Victoria Martins. And from a process standpoint, I'm asking this question. It said that the event happened the late August of 16. Later in the timeline, on February 1st, it says that the DA's office asked the state of New Mexico's crime lab to test the DNA, and the reason was because APD crime lab had stopped doing testing on DNA in the winter because of a software and training thing that was going on, which leaves it to those of us in the community to try to figure out, if you know you're going to have a software and a training, who takes your cases, who does the science, or does it just stop? I mean, that's the way it made it seem. I'm old enough and smart enough to understand that not everything I read in the paper is correct. So I'm asking you, is that accurate, that in the winter, the crime lab stopped asking these things and then the state took over in February 1st? Is that accurate?
Board Member Fine, we weren't here at the time, so I don't know. I don't know if Commander Durant can answer that, but I can tell you that the machinery and some of the equipment there is like anything else. It has to be certified on a regular basis. Some of it has through the state registration, some of it through other standards, federal standards and guidelines as well. I can't speak to that. That does seem like an anomaly, is that if you have an important piece of equipment, you prepare for maybe a backup piece of equipment. I can't answer it. I don't know if you have. He wasn't here at the time as well.
I just thought maybe I should bring it up. It sounded like something went wrong, really wrong.
Let's take just brief questions or comments.
If you had a chance, I have a second question.
Brief, okay.
As I'm sure you know, all the board members are required to do 2 ride-alongs every 6 months in order to be qualified as board members. And I'd like to expand that definition of a ride-along to include other activities within APD other than riding along an 8-hour shift with an officer. That's already started with the communications center, I believe, and I know we can do that as well. I've had some communication with Commander earlier about expanding this, and he agreed that might, he offered several places where that could happen. I'm wondering, is it possible in this case for us to get have the equivalent of a ride-along in one of the departments associated, in this area? I mean, the detective bureau or somewhere else, so that we can get more insight into this process.
Chairman Waits and Board Member Dr. Cass, absolutely. It's a little different than a ride-along. I mean, you'd be assigned to kind of shadow a detective, and you can kind of monitor that process during the course of their shifts or number of shifts. Go out with them on call-outs. I mean, I can't predict when there'll be a call-out, but we could, if you were assigned to a certain detective, so to speak, and he had a call-out, you may get a call at 3 in the morning if you want to accompany him to a call-out of a homicide and see how that works as well, because they never happen during the day. I think they're always going to be at the most inconvenient time for the most part. But you're more than welcome, because that is a good way. I mean, we have interns that come out and do it. There's no reason why the members of the board couldn't attend as well. I mean, there's things that you'll see in terms of from the mundane processes that are involved investigations to the actual hands-on, and I don't know. I mean, you can observe interviews from, behind the glass. I don't think they'd actually have you, but there's a lot that you could see in that short time.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I'm being pointed to Director Harness.
Chair Waits, may I? A couple of questions. May I? Thank you. These are just for my own clarification. So in the working group that you've put together, are you contemplating a testing process for selection of detective? And are you contemplating that a detective would become a promotion?
Chair Waits and Director Harness, yes, that's exactly what we're hoping to determine. If in fact we do make it a process or a promotion, maybe a step up. So we're looking at those opportunities. And
Commander Durant, thank you very much for coming. You responded right away to say that you would be here to answer these questions, and I appreciate it, and thank you, Chief, as well. So as I understand it currently, there is a sergeant who is essentially leading a team of detectives that's investigating a crime.
Chair Waits and Director Harness, that is correct. There's a sergeant who leads the detectives and oversees the investigation.
And is that sergeant promoted through the field examination for promotion to sergeant? Or is there a specialized detective promotion for sergeants within the investigative bureau?
Chair Waits, Director Harness, they promote through the process from the field, or whether it be investigative, it's just a promotional process where they apply based on minimum qualifications. They go through the promotional process. If they meet the criteria, then they get promoted. To transfer to an investigative unit, it's the same process as a detective. We put out a circular with minimum requirements. If they meet the requirements, they submit their resume. Personnel and payroll verifies that they meet the minimum criteria. And at that point, it goes to a testing process within the division that they're applying for.
So then is it possible that an individual could be promoted to sergeant from the field and then move into a detective position and have not yet been with the investigative bureau?
Chair Waits, Director Harness, that is correct. It could happen.
So given what we understand is the training, which at this point is not standardized, is the process the same then for lieutenant? So you have a sergeant who tests for lieutenant, gets on the promotional list, and then could, in theory, lead an investigative bureau, yet have been on patrol for the entirety of their career.
Chair Waits, Director Harness, that is correct. But what historically happens is a sergeant or a lieutenant, because of the amount of responsibility that they take on with the investigative unit, they typically have some sort of investigative background somewhere, and most usually it comes from within the unit that they're applying for. That's not a part of the minimum requirement, but that's historically the way it works and what happens.
Yet, to follow up on Board Member Dr. Cass's questions, that's not a written directive, or it's not a written policy that would direct the department to promote within the investigative ranks, that the promotions and the designations can come from outside the investigative ranks.
Chair Waits, Director Harness, that's correct. It's not a directive.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Chair Waits.
When you have, I don't want to say mistakes, but things overlooked to this magnitude, and so much time has gone by, how are the officers involved, the detectives involved? What's the accountability factor there?
Chair Waits and Board Member Galloway, maybe ask for a little clarification in terms of if a particular officer or detective made a mistake, the accountability on that detective after an extended period of time. It really depends. I guess it would depend a little bit on the magnitude of the case. If there was negligence, obviously we could open, once we learn of misconduct or some type of policy violation, we can open an investigation on that from that point on. Otherwise, there are the normal timeframes for an investigation. But if it's something we just learned, like in the case of the Martins case, we could open an investigation, preliminary at first, to determine what those violations may be. In some cases, it is overlooked at this time. Nothing happens, and there's no review that goes back that far, because in some cases, some of the officers have left or been reassigned, and nobody, takes the time to actually look at it. These are kind of, historically, these are new situations, so it's kind of go as we learn, and I think that's a very good question in terms of pointing that out, is do we hold people accountable for past actions to send messaging to to prevent future, occurrences. And you just stirred that question in me, and it's a good point that I'll have to look into.
So do you guys have any plans to open an investigation? I mean, has there been a need so far? Any reason that you guys feel there would be a need to open an investigation as to what occurred, and probably specifically, if I'm fair, with the Martins?
Well, from talking to the investigators that are currently working this, and from talking to the DAs, there's a lot of things that could have been done better. I don't know if they rise to the actual level of, policy violations. A lot of with certain things like that, we want to make sure there was no, like I said, negligence or deliberate intent. So we're going to review that. We're doing it. We want to run that concurrent to, obviously, not to interfere with the investigation itself, because some of those very people may be witnesses in the case, and we don't want to taint things one way or another until at least that prosecution is started or finished. But we're going to look in it, and if we can keep, since it is internal, some of that would be confidential, we can address that. If nothing else, from a standpoint of, like I said, lessons learned, and we learn more from our mistakes than our successes sometimes, and so that's a good point that you bring up. Thank you.
So that's interesting that you would say lessons learned, because we took action last month as a board to to choose to administratively close cases on our end where the detectives or the officers that were involved were no longer working for APD. And over the course of the month, I've had conversations with people in the community and kind of done my own soul searching, and I find that logic flawed, and it's something that I'll bring up with the board for us. But for you, wouldn't there be value, whether the officers or the detectives that are involved in cases where things may be overlooked or negligence may have occurred, isn't there still value in looking at what occurred to see where policy changes and procedures could be tailored and altered and, bettered?
Yes, and Chairman Waits and Board Members Galloway, we absolutely do that now. We have internal affairs cases that come to my level where the person's already resigned or, been terminated for, or whatever, just left the department. We still look at the facts, and we still write a decision as to what we would do if they were still in the department. So sometimes that recommendation is termination or serious discipline. Just for that reason, even the cases now that come through the internal system that are out of that time frame, because of this backlog, we have a serious issue with that. While I can't impose discipline, I can make those recommendations in there that can be used for progressive discipline or future decisions. So it is of great value, and I think that, again, in this case, we don't have any cases to review, and even though someone may have left, we can still do that and make those decisions so that it's on record somewhere. It more so for officers that are in service, because just because it was out of the timeline doesn't mean that it didn't happen, and we want to be able to have some kind of framework or a measure of performance in terms of this isn't your first offense, so to speak, and we can take more serious action based on this, even though they never maybe even had one day off or one written reprimand during that time frame because of the delays or whatever caused us to go past the extensions. I hope that answers your question.
It does. Thank you so much, and thank you very much for being here tonight to address the board directly. I think that speaks volumes.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Any other comments?
Thank you.
And were you previously in Southeast Command? Is that Commander?
Chair Waits and board member Dr. Cass, yes, I was.
Thank you.
Chief Commander, I appreciate you being here. Our sole purpose is to understand the process. Our goal is to help in the process, and again, I appreciate you for taking the time to come talk to us. Okay.
Our pleasure. You're very welcome. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. We're going to take a small break, maybe a 10-minute break if that's possible.
Yeah.
All right. Can I get a motion?
I make a motion that we take a 10-minute break. I second.
Second. All right. Thank you.
Favor?
Aye.